Hello, good morning, everybody. Hope we're all doing really well. Thanks so much for coming to today's session. My name is Cade. I'm Carro's head of partnerships. I'm excited to kick this thing off. How are we all doing?
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Yeah, good.
Glad to hear it. So guys, we got a really fun session coming up today. We're going to cover a lot about what's been going on with e-commerce. There's been a lot of changes going on in the past 6 months. We're going to do a quick round of introductions. We have people from Carro, Wayflyer, and Structured. An excellent panel today. We're really excited to be here. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and we'll get started. So first things first, Nick, take it away.
I love going first because that way I have way more cooler things to say and everybody else gets to repeat what I'm saying. So I am so grateful to go first in general. Good morning, everybody. Good evening, depending on where you're calling in from. My name is Nick. I am one of the founders at Structured, as well as another Geek Out community and on-demand editing at Constant. So what the unique vantage point that I currently have is I have a lot of data to play with. I have a lot of brands, a lot of niches. And we definitely went through some shit. And I'll definitely say that much in 2020 to 2021, and even with Q1. So we have some interesting things that I'm looking forward to discuss. So again, grateful to be on the panel with you gents, and good to have some. I'm excited to have some good debate with you guys today.
Let's get it on.
Awesome.
Nice.
Cool. All right. Thank you. DP?
Yep, I'm David Perry. I'm the tallest at every event, every conference, everywhere we go. You can't tell in Zoom, but I'm like 6'8". I'm from the video game industry, which kind of gives me permission to enter the e-commerce industry from a weird vector. And so we've had a lot of fun sort of coming in and looking at the industry from a different perspective. And we now have over 30,000 brands using our technology. So we get to sort of work with a lot of people and hear what they have to say. But I'm also personally, for fun, I do photography, and I found that no one cares about my photography unless I take pictures of social media influencers. If you take pictures of influencers, suddenly your pictures become cool. And so it's allowed me to spend time talking to these people and sort of learning about the space even more. So the core thing I'm interested in these days is attention, how to help brands grow. And so I think this is going to be a kind of a fun conversation because again, coming from a different perspective from the others here.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, DP. And last but not least, Dan.
Yeah, hey, I'm Dan. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Wayflyer. We started out back in pretty much September 2019 and started doing funding for e-commerce in April 2020. Have grown quite a lot since then, from 6 people in a basement throwing ideas and shit at a wall, basically, to having 450 employees and kind of going from strength to strength in what we're doing. So much like David, I think a key interest for me personally is how do we do things outside of funding using the data that we have to be able to help e-commerce companies grow and grow fast, because that's kind of the name of the game. A lot of the cycles work in about 2 years. You either make it or lose it in 2 years. So that's what our goal is, to get more people over that 2-year hump to get into that hyper growth, which funnily enough has some similarities to what we've experienced ourselves at Wayflyer. Which is
great. You guys have grown incredibly fast, and that's awesome to see. Well, great.
Cool. Dan, I'm jealous of you because of that accent. I grew up in Northern Ireland, but I've completely lost it. So
I genuinely would not be able to tell that you grew up in Northern
Ireland. So you could never tell, right? It's funny, isn't it?
No way. That's brilliant. Excellent.
Anyway, go ahead. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, so one of the things that we talk about a lot, and especially from a partnership standpoint, is the effect of iOS 14, 15, and how that has really, a lot of stores have taken a big hit over the course of the past few months since that's launched. What are some strategies that we should be talking about and kind of, with the changes that have happened, that we could be sort of leveraging to, better change what we're doing to really maximize, what we got going on? Nick, how about you?
Yeah, Nick would be a good one to cover this one first, I think.
Yeah, I was like, okay, I think I got this one. So we obviously have had to do a lot more leaning on third-party tools. So the first one is I did a big rundown on what was happening, and I actually got a little bit of controversy recently talking about the changes and updates that Facebook will be pushing through in terms of a reporting standpoint. And it definitely went a little bit more viral to the point where I even had my rep reach out to me and go like, hey, can you be a little bit more or less cryptic on this? I was like, look, you should know more than me on this standpoint. But what we're determining is before we be able to get away with running campaigns, looking at whether it's Google, we're going to Facebook, TikTok, Snap, any of these platforms to understand the direction we were going into. It's just not the way that's going to be ran. And every once in a while, the industry gets kind of hit with an overall update, whichever platform, and you're going to actually have to kind of readjust or reallocate spend. And right now, I think the biggest shift is to TikTok, which is something that I won't spend too much time on because we're still in the primitive days of like who should be there, how should we be doing that, how much money does it make sense to spend. We've actually spent a lot more time on generating more like a lead gen flow for email, and we're specifically talking about direct to consumer brands. We're specifically talking about companies that are driving new customer acquisition through these platforms. For one, not B2B, not it could potentially be a little bit on the info side, but I would say corely speaking around the D2C stuff, we are looking for more of a lead gen nurturing flows, whether it's through an SMS platform, whether it's through the email platform that we're leveraging, but it also could be with partnerships, with collaborations with other brands, which is stuff that's been super interesting. It's a little bit harder for us to do from the agency standpoint, but we're starting to see some of our brands do a collaboration drop or do some sort of like limited colorway, do some sort of limited product SKU, and then to release that down. And that's been able to drive incremental new revenue and get that repeat purchase rate coming back, heavily leveraged from their email list. So I know that's something that a lot of people are starting to talk about, or if they're not talking about, they should be. And then I'll leave you guys with one more little nugget. We're familiar with, if some of you come from the affiliate space, or if some of you come from more of like the heavily direct response space, you understand advertorials or pages built to provide information, yet they're more to structure and sell a product. We're having to lean into that for more general products in overall, whether it's baby products, whether it's hair care products, whether it's dog food. We're having to write a lot more content that either lives on our site or on other SEO sites, and putting that into our paid mix, which is something that not too many people are talking about.
Yeah,
very interesting.
At the Geek Out conference, I heard there was a lot of people talking about iOS 14 and what are we going to do and how do we get more efficient, and a lot of the people who sort of caught my attention were the ones that were doing a lot of research and trying to find ways. The point is it gets harder, but you end up, there are still interesting ways to sort of get attention. And there was one example I really liked. There was a guy talking, I can't remember his name right now, but he talked about this idea of going into Google Groups, and he would go into a subject that he needs to market in, but he doesn't know the subject really, like scuba diving, for example. And so then he would start studying what everyone's talking about, and they keep talking about wanting to go on scuba diving vacations. And then they want to talk about, when they talk about vacations, here's a list of the locations they keep wanting to go to. And the number one that he identified was shark diving in Mexico. So then he went and made a video talking to experts in shark diving in Mexico, and then posted that to the group. And suddenly everyone wants to engage with him because he understands their core needs. And so this kind of stuff I love. I love seeing people sort of thinking outside the box, doing that extra bit of work, but then getting really good attention because of it. With us, one thing that we've sort of, again, coming from the game industry, we just look at it a little differently, which is, is there another way to do this that's just different? And the answer would be, if you get a lot of brands together, in our case, the brands that we have on the Carro platform have over 350 million visitors a month. So what you actually find when you look at that is the cohorts and the different categories are buying the same clicks from Google and Facebook. Like if you're selling vanilla candles, you're starting to go after the same people and buying the same clicks. And so our thought process is there a way to get the different brands to collaborate with each other so that I can put my products into someone else's traffic? So if I'm a supplier, will somebody else sell my product? And simply by pushing my products into their store, through a partnership, then now I'm going to get their traffic forever. And so that's free traffic forever, free awareness of my products. So the question is how many potential partnerships are there? And it turns out there's a ton. And so, how much free traffic would you like to have forever, as long as you remain a good partner? That to us seemed like a really interesting way to go about this. But I love hearing different ideas that people have. They're not necessarily hacks, but they're different ways to think about how can they get attention. The reason this matters is because you'll never meet a brand that has enough attention ever. You know, you'll never hear them say, please, no more attention. It's an insatiable desire. And so that's why we're also super interested in influencers, because they have an abundance of attention. To some extent, I think they have so much attention. They're trying to sell a pair of sunglasses, but in the comments, you see people talking about the wallpaper and the drink they're drinking and everything else. They're staring at the whole picture and wanting to acquire everything in it. And so I just think this is such an amazing space. There's so much room for opportunity and growth in getting that attention. So that's why we're having so much fun with this.
It's funny that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, go on. My apologies.
Go, Nick.
One small note on that one. It's funny that you talked about the research side of things, because we have this like budding group of Amazon experts, or people that are like making incredible amounts of money on Amazon. I'm like, wow, why are you guys doing it? It's pure research. Like, they're only researching the keywords, and they're researching the reasons why they should be selling or not be selling it. And so when you get some Amazon groups compared to these e-com groups, and for a long time, e-com was easy, man. You find a product, put it to a product page, sell it, and win. And a lot of businesses that should not have been built were built in this 2019, 2020 arbitrage of platform and cheap CPMs. And they didn't necessarily have to build the ecosystem of support. And they're like, look, I can cash out this bad boy all day. And now all of a sudden you're like, wait, I have to have a community. I have to have a back end. I have to have a retention. I have to have a product research strategy. It gets really interesting, and it gets really expensive because they didn't do the due diligence beforehand. So I think it's amazing to see some of these Amazon folks and see some of these, the depth of comments or research is being put into it is stuff that should have been done, but just now is starting to need to be done.
One thing with Amazon,
yeah, 100%.
I found on Amazon that they started to make, you know when you want to put like the letter A in leather, you use a brass stamp and you hit it with a hammer and it puts the letter A in your leather. It turns out Amazon was making their own leather stamps. And so this worried me greatly for brands that are living within the Amazon ecosystem. You know, how safe do you feel in your category knowing that Amazon's already taking over leather stamps? Right? Getting a little dangerous in there, because ultimately I think their mission is to own all the best-selling categories and in their own private labels. And so that's an interesting space to watch, because I think it forces brands to go out on the internet, the ones that want to have their own customers and not Amazon own all the customers. It forces them to go out on the internet and actually do this the hard way. And so that's why these skills are so critical if you want to actually, you know, be future proof and grow a brand that you own all your customers.
Yeah, and to add to that, one of the interesting things that we're discussing internally and how a lot of our brands have dealt with iOS 14 and what has actually happened with it is, behind the scenes, if you think about the brands that are not selling the exact same products but common enough, you think about who the enemy is, and the enemy for them really is Amazon, like that Amazon that wants to take over that whole space. So what we've discussed with multiple brands is what about a capability of audience sharing in your Facebook platform or your Google platform or your TikTok platform, where brands can start to work together and collaborate behind the scenes in the back end and understand that my audience works well for your products and your audience works well for my products. And instead of having that, like, my enemy is the person that's closest to me, understanding that the consumer market is big enough for nearly all the brands that are out there on their own to be able to cut it with each other and take off a piece of the pie, rather than holding all that data that you have about your customers to yourself, but opening that space up so that you can share with one another and make them progress from that.
Yeah, we found that became like almost a secret sauce for us. How do you detect if this brand and this brand are actually compatible with each other? And the answer is you look at their influencers. If there's a group of influencers that like this brand and the same influencers like this brand, there's a taste profile, like an aesthetic taste profile that you can start to match. And so, you know, the brands are usually like, wow, this other brand, I've never heard of them, but they're really cool. Well, the reason they're really cool is because they're just like you, right? And you know, influencers who to some extent are tastemakers help identify that for you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
definitely. And I think you're bringing up a really good point, which is just like the effect of social media in the purchasing journey that we're seeing a lot of the time. DP, can we talk a little bit more about how we're, seeing the shifts and the trends in 2022 and how social media is affecting the customer's purchasing journey with the stores that we're seeing across our network?
Well, it's partly to do with, I mean, there's obviously these really, great brands out there that have really strong customer bases. But the thing is that they very commonly don't sell everything that the customer wants, and so it becomes an interesting. There's two pieces to the puzzle. There's you're selling spaghetti. That's great. What are you going to upsell at checkout? Spaghetti with your spaghetti? But you've got all these beautiful recipes on your website. Why don't you partner with people? Because currently you're forcing them to go and buy all the ingredients, the cutlery, and everything else elsewhere. So these are things that you could currently do. And so when you look at how that translates across to the influencer space, they have their own stores too. And so can't you work with them and place your products into their stores? But ultimately, I think the business is fundamentally going to change, and that is that the current relationships to get people to sell your products. There's a lot of people giving out codes or URLs that have special UTM links in them, or they're doing some kind of sponsorships. But ultimately, what's happening is they're not really partnering with the other entity. And let's say it's an influencer store. That influencer, I believe in the future, will be the retailer. They will actually sell the product. They will not do the shipping and logistics and support and things like that, but they will be the frontline retailer. They will own their own customers. It's kind of an interesting question or discussion with influencers is, do you want the brand to sell the product, or do you want to sell the product? And then you look at anyone that's really successful, like Kim Kardashian's Skims, $3 billion. It's because they found a way to convert followers into customers. And so this gives a big opportunity for brands and influencers to work together, but at a retailer supplier relationship level. And I'm hearing all kinds of really cool stuff that's coming in that space where brands are white labeling for the influencers because they realize the value of that. There was a great example at the Geek Out conference where someone was talking about selling supplements, and I was like, "Oh, supplements, that's hard." And he's like, "No, but Hailey Bieber ordered the supplements, and then she really liked them, and she invested in our company, and now we're selling ridiculous amounts of them." And it's such an exciting story to hear how that can go. And so it's really, I think there's a lot of opportunity right now.
Awesome, definitely. I have a question for Dan from Wayflyer. You guys have, at this point, you've funded thousands and thousands of companies. Typically, where does that funding allocation go towards, and what are some of the factors, maybe seasonal and whatnot, that affects sort of the funding pipeline?
Yeah, so in terms of what the funding is used for, it's your traditional working capital of inventory and marketing and sometimes freight costs and things like that. So when you're funding those things, the reason you're funding them with a working capital solution like us instead of equity is because equity can get expensive fast for a growing company. What you give away today is far more expensive tomorrow. So if you have consistent cash cycles that are pretty much a treadmill, like as an e-commerce company, you're never not going to buy inventory and you're never not going to spend on ads. So you're gonna need someone to come in and be that partner for you for the long run. Whether it's seasonality based or different throughout the year, it comes in waves. So if you think about a cycle that goes through the summer and builds up to Black Friday, the majority of people are bulk buying stock for November, December. And with those bulk buys, when you actually get into those months, what we see is a transition from anyone purchasing inventory towards the end of October to full-on marketing purchasing for November, December. And usually what happens in January and February is that they're quite slow in terms of the amount, well, traditionally quite slow in the terms of the amount that we would fund on inventory, because our customers have a lot of cash. Like they have a lot of cash on hand because they've just come through their very busy season. So they tend not to need to buy a lot of inventory. And Chinese New Year usually falls around the end of January. So with China closing as well, it becomes something that they're not making these big orders. That's the traditional cycle of it. As we know, the last 2 years have been a bit crazy in the way things have changed and moved. And what we've seen particularly this year is people planning a lot further ahead. So January and February were not down in terms of the amount of funding we would have given out in inventory, because a lot of the customers we work with were like, supply chain and logistics is going to be a nightmare this year. The further I can plan ahead, the better it's going to be for me. So in terms of the cycles or the seasonality of it, we know that selling wise and ramp up wise, people have bought in bulks of inventory that they're sitting on at the moment. But as they start to sell them, those cycles become faster and the inventory becomes bigger and the marketing spend becomes bigger throughout that summer season. So what we'll see is a peak in the amount of funding we do around September, October, and then it'll slow down and drop off. We'll still work with the same amount of customers every month, but it'll be less in terms of funding because the funding will be going on smaller marketing spends compared to their very large inventory orders.
Interesting. Very, very interesting.
Quick question: when a brand wants to get some funding, is this like what's the process? Is it software that do they install something in Shopify to speed up the process, or how does it work?
So we went out and we built our own connectors for the APIs on different e-commerce platforms, pretty much all of them at this point. So, you know, from Shopify to PrestaShop to Amazon, they're all there. And what we do there is we pull in revenue data from the customer, and then we connect into their marketing platforms, their analytics, their bank connector, and their management accounts of profit and loss through Codat. So at that point, it's probably like a 2-minute sign up because they're all one click off. And at that point, it kicks off all of our engines, and our engines just start to put it through the algorithms that basically say whether we're going to be able to give that company funding and how much we would give it, and figure out what their inventory cycles are. So you can see when the payments go out for inventory. So you know that like inventory is getting paid for, say, today, and then in 3 months' time, it's landing in their warehouse. So when we're funding someone, we want to match up to that cycle and basically have our funding sit as a cash conversion cycle. So they're converting what they're buying into cash, so they don't necessarily need to be paying us back on that inventory past the date of them actually selling it, because they're making sales off of it.
So how long would that process be from I'd like to apply to getting approved? What would be a typical latency to do that?
Typically within 24 hours. So I think the fastest is 4.
Wow, that's amazing.
Wow.
4 hours.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I think it's 4 hours to funding in the bank account. So yeah, always trying to make it faster. We want to get that down as quick as possible. But yeah, the automations we've built so far are pretty good that we can make pretty quick decisions. And I think the 4-hour one was $1 million from our bank to theirs in pretty quick time.
Incredible.
It's crazy how that works, because you start seeing some of the brands they're either spending this on inventory, they're spending it on ads. I'm sure some of them are spending it on like hiring our employees, etc. But there's a lot of this that comes into us. We start seeing, hey, like we can't scale, we can't spend, we can't do it. And all of a sudden they have like an injection of cash. They're like, hey, like keep going. Because as soon as something works, and I mean, like Amex is not going to give you that much of a credit line. There's a couple other ways of getting a little bit more friendlier payment terms or delay on this stuff. And it just really hurts your pay team, or really hurts the people that are trying to push growth for you. So it's been really interesting, especially these last 2-3 years where this was a really common practice of getting that support without having to give up a bunch of equity to it. Has helped in the time where things are a little bit slower. So it's been really fun for us, at least on the paid side, to see like, whoa, wait, you last week you're like, no, we can't go. This week we're able to push harder. It was been pretty unique.
Yeah, very good, very good. I'm curious to hear from this panel specifically, you know, because we have such different perspectives and come from different arenas, if you will. What are some of the trends that you guys think are going to be the most exciting in 2022?
I'll lead on this one. I've been thinking about this quite a while. So
Mhm.
the biggest trend right now is the bringing in-house, and this is more from like a personnel standpoint. Before, you would see teams work with agencies on all spectrums of paid, creative, email retention, SMS, and I'm starting to see core competencies kind of come back inside to the brand, coming back inside to the house of brands, oftentimes with all these aggregators that are popping up, and they're only outsourcing, or they're letting some of the specific, like a TikTok media buyer, or it's a specific Google or copywriter that's coming out here, and they're kind of keeping everything close to their chest because it is heavy creative on a lot of these platforms, more than it has been in the past. And that
Mhm.
to me has been something that I've been watching, going like, okay, people are taking it in house, people are starting to build it themselves, yet they're using specialists in various areas to propel growth. And that's something that I think it's going to continue to go, because you do need to keep that brand close to the chest, but you also know that if you are in that 30, 40, $50 million a year range, why not have that person close to you and get that feedback loop much quicker?
Yeah, for me, it's there's a saying, business at the speed of thought, and that is the dream. You want to be able to move as fast as you can think, and so that's a great example where I'd like to raise money, and I can have it within 4 hours. That's unbelievably cool, and the fact that you're even thinking, I wonder if we can do 3 hours, is great, right? And if you think about the whole software stack from that perspective, it just gets better and better and better and more efficient and faster. And so this is what's really exciting, to have all these different entities and teams working on different pieces of that software stack, trying to make it easier so that people can spin up businesses, and grow really, really quickly, like same day. We have discussions in our company where someone's proposing something, and we start with what's the zero click version of that. I mean, is there a zero click version of that, and what is it, and can we please start thinking and going in that direction? So for me, that's the fun thing, is just seeing all this endless innovation and optimization, and trying to understand that people's time is valuable. And I'm seeing a lot of that, and the more the better, honestly. I'm horribly impatient, and I think that when you go buy a car and they throw all the forms on the table, you're like, oh please, are you kidding me? This is 2022 and you're still doing this. And so when you have kids and you watch them using TikTok and everything else, they're so impatient. And it's not. So my point is, do you believe in the future we're all going to get more patient, or we're going to get less patient? And I think that trend is set for life. And so I'm loving to seeing how there is so much work going on to try to get more out of our time, and to entertain us better during that time.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points for me, and it kind of leans into that patience aspect of it, and one of them being because we can see obviously a lot of the spend that our brands are working with, and from this year, even in Q1 compared to last year, the shift from traditional platforms to things like TikTok, and that patience element of it, where people just want to see the ads, they want to buy straight away, is incredible, because we're seeing a 30% increase in spend on TikTok this year.
Wow.
If that continues to go, you're gonna end up seeing what we never thought would happen, would be that Facebook and Google will actually lose a good bit of market share on their ad
Mhm.
platforms. But that's what we're seeing at the moment. And a lot of the feedback on TikTok is basically, if you can get your reporting as good as the other two, people are going to shift over quick. And I know Snapchat had a run last year, and TikTok just seemed to have blasted them out of the water this year. So I think you'll see a lot of shifting with good brands figuring out new ways, whether it's influencer marketing, whether it's TikTok, to push themselves in different directions.
Mhm.
Then the other side of it is on the patience element of it as well. Uh, People in e-commerce are frustrated with freight costs, and they're frustrated with supply chain.
Yep.
And there's a bunch of new products and new startups that are coming out that are solely focused on fixing these issues. And because e-commerce has accelerated so much over the last 2 years, there literally just hasn't been enough containers on the sea, or even boats in the water,
Mhm.
to ship that amount of product. And we saw people go to air freight when they came under pressure, and now you see people planning very early to service the stock, which adds risk because are they going to be selling the same stock in 6, 8, 10 months time? They have to take a little bit of a gamble on that. But ideally, at one click of a button, going back to David's bit on patience, that's what everyone wants. They want that product delivered to their warehouse within a couple of weeks and they want it selling. And at the moment, it is the one trend that is going the other way and making people very impatient.
Mhm.
Like your car analogy, there's forms, there's archaic systems and processes in there that slow the whole thing down. Even legislation around how stacking containers work is slowing things down. So I think the more people that move to e-commerce, the more pressure comes on industries and parts of supply chain like that. And I think the trend will be you'll either have some really cool companies that already exist bringing out products that work that way, or you'll have some new startups that come up with solutions to figure it out.
Yeah, a feature that we've added to Carro is this idea of virtual wholesale. So the idea of the supplier's inventory becomes your inventory instantaneously. So literally just by saying, yes, I will work with you, boom, you've got their inventory. And what that means is, like, say you're selling bicycle helmets, now you have all the helmets in all the colors and all the sizes. In fact, you have every helmet that the entire supplier has in your store instantaneously. And the reason that matters is when Black Friday came around, it's very normal that brands actually shut down and they say, we're not changing our website, we're not doing a single thing because something might break and we can't break on Black Friday. And so they tend to shut down. But we saw the opposite of that, which is they're actually sort of thinking to themselves, how do I maximize this? If I run out of this, I need something else to sell. Like what I don't want is Black Friday to be sold out, sold out, sold out, sold out, sold out, because I'm having issues getting supplies. So this idea of being able to do partnerships, have virtual inventory, meaning that the inventory is sitting with your supplier, but it's in your country. And that means that you can sell more things. And what actually occurred, it's kind of a fun side effect of this, is we're now noticing brands starting to create pop-up stores for specific events. So it's Yoga Day, it's Valentine's Day, it's Halloween. They can then take virtual inventory, so inventory from other brands in that category that fits for Valentine's Day, add it to their store. It gives them something to talk about, like, hey, we've got this, all this special stuff to sell, and then it can just disappear after Valentine's Day, because now you don't have to, you never bought any of it. You don't have it sitting in your warehouses. So this sort of way of thinking digitally, how can we collaborate but keep your site fresh? It is stunning how many e-commerce sites don't change. They're just the same. Every time you log in, it's the same old site with the same 73 products, and that's all they've got, and it's not changing. Maybe someday there'll be a 74th product. That's terrible. It's so boring, and people come in, they see it hasn't changed, and they bounce. And so by keeping your sites fresh through partnerships is a very good way to do that.
Yep, absolutely. Well said. And Dan, you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but what are some of the trends that we're seeing, guys, that are shifting in influencer marketing specifically?
Well, for me, the big one is the ownership of customers. I think that's, if influencers can do that with someone else, they're going to go work with somebody else. And I think I'm predicting is going to be a land grab. So I would say, so you ask yourself, what percentage of influencers own customers? And I would say it's less than 1%. So therefore, that's the largest opportunity for platforms like Shopify to start embracing these people with massive attention and help them sell products. So boom, they suddenly see, Shopify buying Dovetail. There's the Village Marketing recently got bought as well. There's various different entities in the influencer space getting acquired. But the thought is that if you think about the overall e-commerce space, the global TAM, the addressable market for e-commerce this year globally is $5.5 trillion. So I think we're all in a very good space. This is a very good place to be. Like, I thought the video game industry was killing it. We'd say we're $100 billion and we thought that was amazing. No, this is 5.5 trillion. And so the question is if these people want to take some piece of that money, they need to build stores and start to have customers. If those influencers do build stores, then I think there's going to be a land grab situation. If you're a brand selling e-bikes, and this is a great e-bike influencer who just built his store this morning, you don't want to be the last guy in there. How many e-bikes can he vouch for as the best and the coolest? He can't. So there's going to be like a fight, I think, to get into that real estate. It's going to be very, very valuable. And then where this is all going is ultimately social commerce, which means the products will end up being sold in their feed. So I think their stores, I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes influencers make, is they think, I got to build a store to drive traffic to it. No, you don't want to do that.
Right.
You want to build a store to host your products, so then you can put those products directly into your feed. Don't move people out of, you don't want to move people out of their feeds. That's a bad move. But definitely your store should be the source of truth that feeds your feed, if you think about it. That's where I think it's going.
Very cool. Very cool. Guys, I'd love to shift the conversation a little bit more towards customer retention. We touched on this a little bit earlier in the session. It's taking a lot more to get customers on your website. Once they're there, what do they do? What are some strategies? What are some tips that we could give to the audience to talk about customer retention in general? What could we be doing from an e-commerce standpoint for our stores? How do we really maximize the time that we have when our customers are actually visiting our sites?
We have one that we're rolling out across the board for email and SMS. The first one is how-tos. There's a lot of the community focus. So we're looking at building way more communities on Facebook in personalized groups. Two that come to mind right now: Posh Peanut, which is a baby brand. They have a large mommy community it's very congruent. What is the most congruent support system or like-minded community around a product that enables them? And look, children and babies, and in that moment, there's large communities around that as is. The second is one called My Avi, and they build, it's a female women's collagen brand, and they are building a support system or ways for them to like teach how to have healthy living and how to kind of work out. Those are two very clear examples, and all that's driven by just content produced. So they're not even asking for the payment. They're just, hey, get on our newsletter, be a part of who we are. And in that flow itself is pushing them to this like growing community where they're actually getting insights and reports back on how products should happen. I think the second one is content purely. Like this is not a groundbreaking play, but having consistent content being produced that isn't particular about selling. It is more particular about educating and providing a little bit more value than just kind of, hey, buy our product, here's a couple of discounts. And was a trend in 2020 because they needed to keep the lists active, right? You didn't want to suppress so many of these non-openers. You needed to kind of keep it healthy, especially with the updates that Klaviyo was having. But overall, I think it is kind of a shift towards what does a community look like and how we can get more content out there just so that they're opening it.
Yeah, what I've heard marketers talk about, which I think is really fascinating, is this idea of not always trying to sell. I think that's really interesting. It's hard to imagine that I'm going to make an ad and I'm going to run it somewhere. Well, I'm going to pitch you my product. I'm going to try to get you to buy it, right? That's just the automatic thought. But then there's not really. What you want them to do is to get familiar with your brand and learn about it and understand it and start to become familiar with it. If you think about it, that's really what celebrity is, and that's what the influencers are. They become very familiar. You could spot them in a crowd. And so what can you do as far as creating content goes that's not trying to just ram your product down someone's throat, but that's letting you learn the brand's name and maybe seeing the product just getting used, a glimpse of it here and there. But that content gets you to a point that when you finally do see an ad for it, you're like, you're so familiar with it. It's something that you know, and you can go for an easier conversion at that point. It's that concept of sort of tapping them on the shoulder multiple times and then actually finally you're interacting with them. But it's a very different way to think about it, not just trying to sell on every single piece of content you generate. And so I think that was a discussion I heard some marketing people talk about. I found it very interesting.
Yeah, and I actually, to jump in on top of both Nick and David here, the key to it is in the data. So with selling something, you got to know when the time is to bring that in. So if you are going to do that kind of tap on the shoulder, you're not selling, you're getting people connected to the brand, and that's actually the goal and that's the strategy. You don't want to leave it too long, but you don't want to do it too short. So it'll tell you in the data about when you should push and when you should actually get to selling, and that will create that retention if you understand the data well enough to be able to say, like, we've run all these ads for a significant amount of time, and that cohort that is looking at them all the time is now ready to buy. And if you're looking at retention, they've already purchased from you, so you know a lot about these customers already. So knowing about those customers means you have that data, and being able to analyze that data properly in cohort analysis will tell you the exact timing that you got to use to be able to bring them back in and increase your LTV on those purchases.
Yeah, Gary, I think Gary Vee talks about this idea of, you don't just punch, you jab, punch. That's the concept.
And I'll even double down on your data plays, because those purchases that just came in, that audience is super fresh and super relevant, and they're in this excitement euphoria phase of like, is that product coming to me? That is the most engaged way, where like they're hoping that the product is gonna be everything that they're seeing or reading or being sold upon. And so they're excited within that first, like 7 days. Let's say some of you are getting shipped next day, etc. But until it gets to you, what we've seen in terms of a retention play, you're having all these past ads or best performing, maybe they're branded, maybe they're made for direct response, and your customer support team or your team that is in charge of the moderation of the comments are starting to comment and share, hey, here's objective overcoming content or responses that we're seeing from our best performer buyers, and they're posting reviews on every one of these ads, and it turns into like a retention play, because now they're seeing real life customers buying it on acquisition style creative. And it's been something that it's a little bit of a process to build, but as soon as you have some great reviews on specific objections that your product is trying to sell for, and this starts living on acquisition ads or starts living on maybe some branding, audience building ads, it turns into a really unique strategy top of funnel.
Definitely. Well, cool. I got one more question for the group, and then I want to open up a panel for a little bit of Q&A with the audience. But if we had to say, what is our biggest one thing prediction that we're going to see in a change in e-commerce for 2022? What is that one thing?
The biggest thing.
Yeah, the biggest thing we got.
I think.
I actually think the biggest thing will go to what Carro is doing, and that shift to the influencers. When you talk about that 1% that is there on the land grab, I think influencers are going to become incredibly big over the next 6 months, especially as we come into Black Friday. I think the smarter and more strategic e-commerce companies will know the power of it and know that it can accelerate an insane amount of growth quick. So I think with iOS 14, yes, people will move to TikTok. Yes, people will move to other platforms. Ultimately, they will get results from it, because the not everyone has moved there. But if everyone moves there, you'll end up with the same problems that you have on the other platforms. With this, I can't see a way that it fails. Definitely not in 2022 anyway. I think the people that get there first will make a lot of gains out of it.
Yeah, so I feel the same way. I think that whole opportunity space is just profound and strangely untapped. There are very interesting technical problems in doing it, and it sounds. I'll give you an example. Is brands never agree how to tag things, so their products in their store are tagged and cataloged very differently from other stores, and so like we literally have AI running, doing image recognition, trying to help all of these different brands name things correctly so that they're compatible for influencers to be able to work with them at scale. It's like a very big, hard problem, but in reality, once that is solved, the opportunity space is just ridiculous. And so that's why I do agree. I think it's probably, for me, the most exciting thing is that opportunity of partnering, like really partnering and with large networks. So what you find is influencers commonly are actually in groups. So they have, they work with an agency, and there's a whole bunch of them in a single agency. And so the education comes from the agency, and the agency sort of gets up one morning and goes, you know what? Merch doesn't have to have your logo on it. Because again, you're wearing a t-shirt with your logo on it, but they want to know where those glasses came from, and they want to know everything else in the picture, you know, the food you're eating and stuff. So they want all of that. So that's when I think the agencies start to realize that there's a much bigger opportunity here than just doing a merch deal with a merch company that keeps all their customers. It makes me sad when I hear, oh, I just did a merch deal, and I go, they're keeping all your customers, right? And the answer is yes. That's terrible. So yeah, I think the opportunity space is absolutely vast.
I think I'll double down a little bit more. So when we released a little bit like the ebook of what Wayflyer is doing and a couple of other are like social media influencers, if you will, and the Wayflyer Twitter handle posted and it got like this much engagement, and then Dan did it, and then it was like probably one of the most viral things I've seen in quite a long time, and I'm like that ability to relate more to the actual human, the face, is going to turn even more valuable because look, whitelisting, white labeling through platforms on Facebook, there's a literal CPM change difference when you're running through other platforms and pages, and a conversion rate play when it's a congruent creative to a congruent audience to a congruent message to a page that looks exactly like what you just saw in the ad from a creator that you actually have relative relation with, like that avatar speaks to you in a certain way, right? That is going to be in abundance, and Facebook wants it, Twitter wants it, TikTok wants it, all the platforms want it. They know it because that's an easier, more enjoyable experience rather than Lululemon's talking about how great our pants are. You want that influencer to talk how great the pants are, right? And I think it's very interesting, especially when you were kind of talking closely to a DP about like shop my look, shop everything, right? And that's that live recording, that's that live engagement. That's platforms where they're there because they like you as a person, all the things you're interested in, whether it's these pictures or whether it's these blinds. That to me is going to be not necessarily selling, but giving people the opportunity to be a part of it, buy it, or be in it. It's funny. I don't know if you guys sit down, like sometimes when me and my lady are sitting and she's looking at Instagram or Facebook, and I look at her, I'm like, you don't look at the picture like me. I just scroll by the picture. She's in the comments and she's looking at all of these little messages. I'm like, is that how you engage on the platform? She's just looking at all the comments, and I'm like, wow, that's how a lot of other people do it. So when you're seeing comments and engagements and feedback and people answering the story or what it is, it really is a unique way of consuming these things. And I think that the more engaging and the more information on these viral-esque posts are going to be something that will be more in the front of 2022 and 2023.
Yeah, it's something that becomes addictive, honestly. Like when you meet, like say you're into a certain photographer, and then that photographer says, this is the best light ever, and then you buy it and you're like, that light's incredible. Then you're in, right? The next thing he tells you that you should begin, this is the best tripod ever. Now you're like, well, I believe him, I trust him. And that's incredibly valuable to be able to have that relationship. You don't have that with just some faceless store, you know?
Right.
It's just a very different thing, and so I think it's addictive, and I don't think it's going away.
Cool. Awesome. Gentlemen, thank you. Now I'm going to use this time that we have left over to answer any questions that the audience may have. So audience, if you guys have any questions that you'd like to get thoughts from our panel on, please go ahead and go into the chat. We'll give you a couple minutes to kind of fill those out. But in the meantime, too, Nick, could you talk a little bit about your book? We actually added it as a handout for today's session.
Yeah, this was awesome. So we wrangled up a couple of people that are actually actively creating the space, that are building specifically around like paid acquisition, financing, where to get the cash, email retention marketing, just like the things that are working in 2021, 2022. Because I don't want to do a huge shift into 2022 just yet, because we did this in Q1. There are some like macro headwinds, whether it's like on what's happening in the world versus what's happening in the DTC space. I'd still think that there's a lot of things that are applicable in 2021 that people aren't caught up with. And so we've kind of done a review of what we've done in 2021, updated with the Q1 information, just to make sure things are still applicable. And I'm really proud of what everybody put together. So it's something that I think you as a head of growth, you as a brand owner, you as maybe an acquisition specialist or retention specialist, there's some stuff that you can pull out for everybody. So I'm really proud of all the work that was put in from myself, the rest of the crew, and the Wayflyer team for sure.
Very cool.
Very cool. And yeah, if you'd like a copy of that, that should be in the bottom of your screen. 6 proven growth strategies to scale your brand in 2022. It's right over there. You can go ahead and click on the button, grab your copy, and kind of go from there. Well, guys, looks like we are good to go for today. Thank you all very much for joining us for this session. Thank you to our panelists for joining us today. If you have any questions, we'll go ahead and do a follow-up afterwards. You can get our contact information, learn more about Wayflyer, Structured, and Carro. But that's it. Thank you, folks. Appreciate it. We'll see you soon. Take care.
Thanks so much.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.